Okay. It's been a little while. Since I've been here, and a couple of things have happened in that time. I'd like to talk a little bit about the war in the Persian Gulf. Big doings in the Persian Gulf. You know my favorite part of that war? It's the first war we ever had that was on every channel plus cable. And the war got good ratings too, didn't it? Got good ratings. Well, we like war. We like war. We're a warlike people. We like war because we're good at it. And you know why we're good at it? Because we get a lot of practice. This country's only 200 years old, and already we've had 10 major wars. We average a major war every 20 years in this country, so we're good at it. And it's a good thing we are. We're not very good at anything else anymore. Huh? Can't build a decent car, can't make a TV set or a VCR worth the fuck. Got no steel industry left, can't educate our young people, can't get health care to our old people, but we can bomb the shit out of your country, all right? Huh? We can bomb the shit out of your country, all right? Especially if your country is full of brown people. Oh, we like that, don't we? That's our hobby. That's our new job in the world, bombing brown people. Iraq, Panama, Grenada, Libya, you got some brown people in your country, tell them to watch the fuck out, or we'll goddamn bomb them. Well, when's the last white people you can remember that we bombed? Can you remember the last white, can you remember any white people we've ever bombed? The Germans, those are the only ones, and that's only because they were trying to cut in on our action. They wanted to dominate the world. Bullshit, that's our fucking job. That's our fucking job. Now we only bomb brown people. Not because they're trying to cut in on our action, just because they're brown. Now you probably noticed I don't feel about that war the way we were told we were supposed to feel about that war, the way we were ordered and instructed by the United States government to feel about that war. You see, I tell you, my mind doesn't work that way. I got this real moron thing I do, it's called thinking. And I'm not a very good American because I like to form my own opinions. I don't just roll over when I'm told to. Sad to say, most Americans just roll over on command. Not me. I have certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me. Nothing. Zero. Nope. And I don't take very seriously the media or the press in this country, who in the case of the Persian Gulf War were nothing more than unpaid employees of the Department of Defense, and who most of the time function as kind of an unofficial public relations agency for the United States government. So I don't listen to them, I don't really believe in my country, and I gotta tell you folks, I don't get all choked up about yellow ribbons and American flags. I consider them to be symbols, and I leave symbols to the symbol-minded.
Iraq, cradle of the ancient civilizations of Assyria, Babylon, Nineveh and Ur. Steeped in history, it is one of the most significant regions of the world. Muslims conquered Iraq at the time of Umar bin al-Khattab. It became one of the most important Muslim lands, from where large Islamic conquests began. Some of the greatest battles of Islam took place on its soil, like Qadisiyah and Madain. And it was home to many great cities like Basra, Kufa and Baghdad. The two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, cross its land, making its wide plains some of the most fertile and productive lands in the world. Later, its distinctive geographic location at the head of the Gulf meant it was a vital route connecting Europe with the Indian Ocean. Its importance increased after the discovery of oil at the beginning of the 20th century. Iraq as a nation-state was established in 1921 after being part of the Uthmani Khilafah. The British and French occupied much of the Arab world in the First World War and sought to consolidate their power over the captured lands. In 1916, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, forged from this Anglo-French alliance, allocated what became Syria and Lebanon to the French and what became Iraq and Transjordan to the British. The League of Nations, a precursor to the United Nations and established by the Western victors of the war, quickly validated in international law British control over Iraq in the form of a British mandate. The Arabs, for their part, were largely unaware of the colonial designs that the Anglo-French alliance had over their lands. Indeed, misguided though it may have been, their participation in the Arab revolt against the Uthmani Khilafah in 1915 was a revolt to gain Arab independence and self-rule, not to exchange the rule from Istanbul for rule from Paris and London. The British encouraged the Arabs to revolt with a set of vague promises of independence that the Arabs believed, though the British had no intention of honouring these promises. However, the Anglo-French occupation of the Muslim lands did not sit well with the Arab masses. They had been comfortable under the rule of Islam for over 1,000 years and had only recently fermented Arab nationalism and a desire for independence from the Uthmanis over the last 50 years. However, they were naive to capitalist colonial's foreign policy and expected the colonizers to keep their word. When they did not, there were rebellions and insurgencies throughout the Arab world, including Iraq. So it became necessary for the occupiers to set up an image of independence across the Arab world in order to avoid continued turmoil. Faisal ibn Hussein al-Hashim was born in Mecca in 1885, son of Sharif Hussein, the governor of Mecca. He held administrative positions in the Uthmani political system and became a vociferous spokesman and supporter of Arab nationalism. He was well known to T.E. Lawrence, the British colonel who became famous as Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence favoured and befriended Faisal and used him as one of the leaders of the Arab revolt for the British.
Lawrence decided that the Arabs needed a leader from their own race. He chose Faisal.
During the early colonial disturbances, Faisal sought at a Paris conference in 1920 to become king of a pan-Arab state. His request was rebuffed by the French and British, who had already agreed on the division of the Middle East into small Arab nations. Instead, he was made king of Syria. After a brief one-year period as king, he was removed by the French mandate, and the British eventually decided to use Faisal to subdue Iraq. Faisal's nomination was championed by Gertrude Bell, a chief advisor to Churchill who was based in Iraq and was a friend of Faisal's. At a Cairo conference in 1921, the British decided to name Faisal King of Iraq. King Faisal's coronation was strictly a British affair, and he received his crown to the British anthem, God Save the King. In truth, his position was largely ceremonial and symbolic, and Iraq continued to be ruled under the British mandate. The British had already started using oil to power their naval cruisers and battleships, and there was already a recognition that oil was to become an important resource. It had been noted that there were pools of sludge around Iraq that would burst spontaneously into flame, and it did not take long for the British to exploit this resource. In 1925, an oil deal was signed that underlined the British subjugation of Iraq. The agreement granted Iraq only token royalties from any future oil revenue, but the lion's share went to the British-dominated Turkish Petroleum Company. Indeed, the British intended to keep Iraq's oil to bolster its own industrialized economy. The British plan was that King Faisal would appear to the people to strive for the independence of Iraq from the British mandate.
Dover train brings the 49-year-old ruler of 3 million Arabs on his state visit to London. The two monarchs renewed the acquaintanceship begun during King Faisal's first visit 13 years ago.
In 1932, this charade was rewarded with recognition by the League of Nations of Iraqi sovereignty. But in reality, independence was only granted on condition that the Iraqi government be bound to support British foreign policy in the region, allow Britain to retain its air, naval and land military bases, and permit continued British domination over its oil resources. On his death, ruling was passed to his son, King Ghazi ibn Faisal. In World War II, Hitler unsuccessfully challenged the British in Iraq by making contact with King Ghazi ibn Faisal, who had grown opposed to the British. The king responded favourably, but when Britain discovered his relationship with the Germans, it arranged for him to be killed in a car accident. His young son, Faisal II, became king. The British appointed his uncle Abdullah, a loyal British subject, as Prince Regent and Crown Prince.
From the towering mosque in Baghdad comes the Regent of Iraq after Friday prayers. He is Regent for the 7-year-old King Faisal II, grandson of Faisal, the first king. They take great care of this little monarch when he visits the camp of Britain's Empire Army.
Nuri Said was appointed Prime Minister.
The official inauguration of the Zubair oil field was recently performed by the Prime Minister of Iraq, Nuri Pasha Said, in the presence of British, American and Iraqi spectators. Many benefits to the country are expected.
In 1941, Germany repeated its attempt to take Iraq from the British, this time by supporting Rashid Ali al-Kilani, who actually succeeded in taking authority on March 2, 1941. Kilani immediately declared war against Britain, taking side with Germany. However, Hitler could not supply him with the necessary land troops and only some German air squadrons. Britain, frightened by the occurrence of this sudden coup and the danger posed by the access of the Germans to Iraqi oil fields, quickly moved to overthrow Kilani.